Ladies and gentlemen, I have to ask you to excuse the fact that, like many of my English colleagues, I do not speak Spanish or Portuguese, and I feel embarrassed at the number of you that are not wearing earphones and obviously can understand English. I will try to speak slowly so the interpreters do not have a problem if you need the translation. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this conference. It is an important conference on a very pertinent topic. But personally, for me it is exciting because apart from 3 days in Porto Alegre, I have never been to South America. So this is a great personal opportunity to see a little bit of this part of the world. Now, there are a lot of aspects of seasonality to discuss. I will not be able to spend a lot of time on many of these, but these are some of the issues and points that I would like to discuss and hopefully explain a little bit. This is what we see when we talk of seasonality in tourism. This happens to be Greece, but it is probably a similar pattern to what you experience here and what we see in many parts of the world. A sharp peak in this case in the summer, which in the northern hemisphere, of course, is June, July, August, and a very sharp decline and a sharp rise either side. We can define seasonality. As an academic, we always use a lot of words, but basically an imbalance, an uneven distribution of the phenomenon of tourism, however we measure tourism. We can measure it, of course, in a number of ways: the total number of visits, number of bed nights, the amount of money, income generated, number of people employed. All are very important. In most cases, we use the total numbers of bed nights. And in general, it is much better to use the numbers of staying visitors than total visitors that includes day trippers. People staying overnight obviously spend more money, have more economic impact on a destination. Whatever unit we use to measure it, it is the temporal, the time aspect that is important. And it's generally seen as the result of both supply and demand factors that produces that distinctive pattern. In some extreme remote areas, I traveled here from northern Canada. In the far north of Canada, the season is a few weeks, not months. And so into maybe 4 to 6 weeks, you have to pack all of the tourism activity. And that obviously creates problems, logistics, employment, and so forth. Even capital cities, places like Las Vegas and Macau, gambling centers, rarely experience completely even distribution of tourism over the year. Because if there are not seasonal aspects to the city, there will be seasonal aspects to the demand. People are having holidays at different times, and so forth. Now, from an economic point of view, of course, seasonality is a problem. In other places, it is not necessarily seen as a problem, or in some cases, it is not seen as a problem that can be overcome. This quotation from some colleagues working in Denmark, in Northern Europe, where they are on a small island peripheral to the mainland, their conclusion was that they cannot do anything about seasonality, and they have to accept it as a fact and not see it as a problem. Obviously, it depends on the scale at which you are operating and the alternatives that you have as to whether you see it as a major problem or a minor difficulty or something to live with. This book is probably the most comprehensive study of seasonality in tourism and raises some of the issues, and that quotation, an example, is in that book. Finally, just by way of introduction, it is important to remember that there are positive effects to seasonality. Many people in tourist areas, while they are very glad to see tourists and to have tourists, are quite often equally glad to see them disappear and to have a quiet time to be able to recoup and get back to what they see as a normal pattern of life. An out and off season allows us to recuperate, it allows us to maintain and improve facilities, and it may even in some areas, and Denmark is one example, allows the labour force to move into other forms of economic activity. But in other areas, and this is probably one of them, seasonality is seen very much as a problem. But we do have to accept that the more remote, the higher the latitude of a destination, the more difficult it is to overcome seasonality. Now, if we are going to understand it, we need to understand what causes it. As one of the other speakers mentioned, we tend to break down the causes of seasonality into two types, what we call natural and institutional. The natural causes are what we see out here, where it's starting to rain at this time of the year, the sun is less, the hours of sunlight are fewer, the temperature is lower, and so forth. The variations in natural phenomenon that exist. It is important to note, though, that one aspect of seasonality is that it is regular. The natural seasons have occurred since as long as we know, and that gives us an opportunity, or it should give us an opportunity, to be able to mitigate, to affect that distribution of visitors. We know it comes, we know it happens, we know when it happens, we know for how long it happens in most cases. It is unlike some other short-term problems that are irregular, things like natural disasters, epidemics, terrorism, which occur surprisingly quickly and with no anticipated warning. With seasonality, we know it will come, it will be regular, it will last so many months. That should help us to be able to deal with it. It is also important to remember it is not unique to tourism. It affects agriculture, it affects fishing, it affects many other activities. And perhaps we can learn from some of those activities how we might adjust to it and adjust it in the context of tourism. The important difference for tourism, of course, is that tourism offers experiences rather than a tangible, hard product. And they are experiences which we cannot keep for another day. So if we do not sell a bed tonight, it is not sold. We cannot offer that bed another day to make up for the one we have lost. So tourism is ephemeral, it's intangible, what it is offering. And lastly, for consistency, we need much more than we have done in the context of seasonality to look at demand as well as supply. As I will say, many of our adjustments to seasonality have been on the supply side, and they have not necessarily worked particularly well. The demand side is at least as important, if not more important, than the supply side. So we have the natural causes, we have the seasons like this, and we are all familiar with those, and they affect many patterns of life. But over time, we have, as it were, humankind, taken control of our environment to some degree, and we have created our own seasons. Some of them for long-standing religious, cultural reasons, some relatively recently, new forms of culture, new forms of entertainment, new legislation. They vary much more widely than the natural causes. They are much less consistent in their influence. And they should be able to be adjusted. We should be able to remove some of them, to modify some of them. They reflect the religious, cultural, this is a little blurred, I apologize, but Ramadan, Diwali, Christmas, Chinese New Year, different periods which reflect very heavily on tourism and which are created by us for our convenience, interest, and so forth. The first aspects of institutional seasonality began with religious holidays, holy days, holidays. We followed that up with creating school holidays, so we closed schools, at least in the Northern Hemisphere and much of the rest of the world, for a long time in the summer. The reason for closing schools in the summer is not to give children time to play, it's not to give teachers time to rest. It was to help children help in the harvest of crops. We needed excess labor. We don't anymore. Very few children are involved in agriculture, certainly in developed countries. But we maintain the long school holiday over the harvest season. And many researchers argue that the biggest cause of seasonality in tourism is the school holiday. Because for parents, if you wish to go on holiday with your children, you go when the schools are on holiday. So at least part of the seasonality is made by us and should be able to be changed by us. We also see industrial holidays where companies, less now, but in the past, closed for a week, 2 weeks, shut the factory down, everyone will go on holiday. Increasingly now, however, we see the next two, social fashion and sporting seasons. Social seasons are long-standing. They go back at least to the 17th, 18th centuries, when the aristocracy, the affluent, would spend a time of the year in the capital city, a time of the year in the country, a time of the year in another destination. And these evolved into fairly strict patterns of fashion. Some of them still exist, some of them have disappeared. But we talk of the fashion season when fashion shows take place in Milan, in New York, in London, in Paris. We talk of film festival seasons when Oscars and other film festivals take part. We have Carnival, in most cases in February or in that time of the year. And these are created artificially by us and have passed into our folklore, if you like. We also have sporting seasons. There was an interesting article in the London Times newspaper last week called "To Everything There Is a Season." And the writer was pointing out that the traditional seasons for sport, in fact, are getting stretched. So that in Northern Europe, football started in September and finished in April. Now it starts in August and it will finish in May. And then, of course, there is the World Cup next to you, which continues into June. So football is almost year-round. There is very little of a football season. And the same with tennis. Tennis used to be 4 big tournaments: New York, Paris, Melbourne, and Wimbledon in London. But now we have tennis tournaments, international important tennis tournaments throughout the year, played indoors, played on different courses all around the world. So in sport we are seeing the disappearance or the weakening of seasons very much. And the last factor of the institutional ones is inertia. We simply don't like change. A large part of the tourist pattern is because it's what we always do. We go on holiday to this place, we go on holiday at this time of the year, we go on holiday and do these things. And we tend to repeat them. And we tend to do them with slight variations through most of our lives. So inertia, just sheer reluctance to change, is something which is very important to overcome if we hope to change the seasonal pattern of visitation to places. So even if we provide a lot of different supply, a lot of very attractive opportunities, there is still the mental part for people of getting them to try something new in a different place at a different time from what they are used to. Now that leads us into the issue which has not been discussed very much in the context of seasonality, and that is constraints. Very few of us, if any, are free to do whatever we like, whenever we like, for as long as we like. Most of us have constraints, family constraints, income, employment, which limit us as to what we can do, when we can do it, where we can do it, how long we can do it. And constraints are an important part of explaining our pattern of tourism. Now, in the academic literature, we tend to look at constraints as barriers, things which stop you doing what you might want to do, what you would like to do, what you wish to do. And if we want to enlarge a market, if we want to modify a market, we need to understand what those constraints are and see if we can remove or modify the constraints to make the person free to change their pattern. We think normally of three types, working from the left, the intrapersonal constraints, group pressure, peer pressure, the ideas that we have about what is appropriate to do in certain situations. Where is the appropriate place to go on holiday? Where is the in destination? What is the peer pressure put upon us, particularly the younger generation, where perhaps it's more important than when we get to our age that we feel more confident to break with tradition. But the younger group is very much a group, peer pressure, social media, and so on, impose on them intrapersonal constraints, even if they are not fully aware of them. They are very aware of where people go, what they do, what is in, what is cool, what they should be doing. Secondly, there are the interpersonal constraints, those that affect us particularly as individuals, our family limitations, children, aged parents, lack of money, family situation, and so on. If husband and wife disagree over holiday patterns, it can be a very unhappy holiday. So what are the limits set on individuals? And they, of course, are much more difficult to modify because you are dealing with each person as a person and less as a group. And how those come together are important. And the last part, the structural constraints, are the ones perhaps which we can modify best. These are the ones that are things like accessibility, cost, opening hours, policy issues, any constraints on entry, skill required to participate, age limits, and so forth. They are situational constraints. And that is the area over which generally outside forces, tourism industry, governments, have potentially more control. Now, constraints are not necessarily absolute. They are not permanent. People overcome them. We have three types of people who respond to constraints. Those who give up. They decide not to participate and are known as passive responders. They simply, there is a constraint, they don't overcome it. There are those who do continue, they do participate, achievers. They proactively deal with the constraint. And there are those classified as attempters who participate but in a lesser scale, in an altered manner. They're partly successful in overcoming the constraints. So if we are going to deal with constraints, it's necessary to look at them at as close to individual level as we can, to particular target groups, target segments, as to what are perceptual constraints, cost constraints, time constraints, institution-imposed constraints like policy decisions, opening hours, and so forth. The first two factors, the personal ones, are demand constraints. What we do here has little effect upon those directly, certainly not upon number two. The third one is mostly supply constraints. What is happening here, how people get here, and so forth. So the end result, what we get, is the interaction between the generating area, its climatic factors, and the receiving area, its climatic factors and patterns. If it's cold and wet in an area, perhaps we think more kindly of going somewhere that is hot and warm. But that isn't necessarily so. We have found in Canada, working in the ski industry, that for short ski trips, day or weekend trips, if there is no snow in the home area, people tend to think there may be no snow in the destination area. So they don't think about skiing. So partly what is happening in the home area determines how people will think what is happening in the other area. So information flow is important to counteract what may be negative impressions. And underneath there we have the pattern of social cultural factors at home, what institutional constraints like work holidays, religious holidays and so forth work at home, versus what is offered and works in the destination area. So the big Muslim pilgrimage, the Hajj, is going to take part in October this year. That is predetermined by the religious authorities who set the timetable for the Hajj. It's then incumbent upon the supply side, Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, Mecca, to be ready to accommodate the seasonal appearance of the pilgrims. So, potentially we have supply-side interventions and we have demand-side interventions. Now, there are a number of issues that come up before any intervention can be successful. One of the points we heard earlier, the need for integration with other stakeholders, not just public and private, although that is critical, of course, but also local and external, both at this scale, at regional scale, national scale, and even international scale for some of these adjustments. The issue of changing the behavior of potential visitors. Tourism is very much freedom of choice. It's part of leisure. People do not take kindly to being told what they must do, when they must go for their leisure. So it's more of what's called a nudge than a push to persuade them that it is appropriate to change their pattern to a different time or a different place, rather than tell them that they must go. Thirdly, there is often a lack of universal agreement over what should be done, what could be done, whether it should be done. And finally, of course, there is the issue of the rest period or the recuperation period, and the need perhaps to decide whether a place wants to go year-round or simply to extend its season into the shoulder seasons. So, what are, in general terms, some of the alternatives that are available? We have to recognize not every alternative is available in every place. Places are different, they have unique attractions, they have unique conditions. So what will work in one place will not necessarily work in another place, and so forth. So the first and the most direct one and the most common adjustment to seasonality is to maintain and extend the market year-round. In other words, more of the same to the same market for a longer period of time. And that's what many destinations attempt, to expand the shoulder season at the beginning and the shoulder season at the end. The second alternative is to create a new opportunity in the same place for the same market, but at a different time of the year. So that you go after your present market, but offer them something different that will attract them at a different time of the year. A third alternative is to create a totally new opportunity for a totally new market at a different time. So you are changing everything. You are changing the opportunity, you are changing the market you are going to go after, and you are changing the time at which you're going to operate. And it may be necessary to do that option or three, because you will not be able to extend your present market, or you will not be able to extend the current offering. A fourth and more specialized alternative is to make the destination truly unique at a different time that will attract a new market. So there is something special, unique, different, going on at the off-season that makes this place, whatever place we deal with, a place that should be visited. One-off events, of course, very successful. World Cup, Olympics and so on, but they are normally one time, not reoccurring. They may, the host country often hopes, set the pattern that Olympics this year, Pan Asian Games the next year, Student Youth Games the next year, and that you will have a series of such events forever. It's very, very difficult to do that and costly, but it's possible. And the last one is to simply become a trendsetter, to create an exciting range of different opportunities at a new time in the same destination. So we have the three elements. We have the destination and its opportunities, we have the time of year, and we have the market. And how we modify those, the modifying actions, things that we've seen in many places like differential pricing and differential taxation, new attractions and events, market diversification, will hopefully alter the pattern of tourism at a destination. Now, it does raise a number of questions. Adding a summer season to a winter season, or adding a winter season to a summer season, is not easy. It can be expensive. There are a few cases where a winter season has been successfully added to a summer season, and vice versa. Ski resorts are the obvious examples. Ski resorts that then cater to a summer market. Vail and Aspen in the United States, with Sundance Film Festival, other festivals, and offering ever-increasing attractions for summer, building on their winter publicity. Smaller summer resorts in Scotland, for example, which added a winter season, albeit a minor ski season, but successfully enough to keep hotels open year-round. But there it depends very much on the fortunate coincidence of a winter season, potential snowfall, temperatures, and so on, plus mountains that allow the development of winter sports. And that is somewhat fortuitous if it exists. The Caribbean islands have developed somewhat of a summer season to counteract their warm winter main season by attracting former Caribbean residents back in the summer. They adjust to the heat. As part of their homeland, they come in the off-season and provide a sizable market that counteracts the particularly North American and Northern European tourists who come in the summer. And of course, there is the Atlantic City, Las Vegas, Macau model, which operates year-round based on gambling. There are few of them that operate at that scale that successfully. Las Vegas was the first, of course. Atlantic City followed with the legislation allowing gambling in New Jersey, and Macau has now caught and surpassed both of them very rapidly. In all cases, they had certain things in common. First, for Las Vegas, it had a monopoly, the only, or close to the only gambling site in the United States. So it had the whole of the United States market. Macau, of course, is on the doorstep of potentially the biggest market in the world, mainland China, and thus is very adjacent, very accessible to that. It makes it very difficult for anywhere else to expect it can compete on that scale with those three particular entities. But gambling has proved itself one way of attracting a year-round market if it is offered at the right scale. So key questions then. We need to ask ourselves, what will create new demand? What is out there that we can seize on? If we can identify things, are there appropriate resources? Water resources, energy resources, labor resources, capital resources, land resources. What is there at present that could be modified, scaled up, adjusted, changed in a different way? Who would do this? Local? Unlikely on its own. So local, regional, national, perhaps international. You have international hotel chains, so here you have international presence already. Almost as important, what is the existing competition? There is no point in going forward if you feel you are inevitably going to be beaten by close, similar competition that is already well established and hard to beat. What are the constraints that I mentioned before on your market or potential markets? Is it transport? Is it image? Is it cost? What is it? And finally, and really of considerable importance, what can you do that is compatible with your current market and image? There is not much point in creating a new season if in doing so you destroy the image and the potential of the existing market. You need to broaden, to widen, to extend in such a way that it does not harm what you have already. So offering very down market offerings in the winter may harm an up-end market in the summer if it creates the wrong image. Cruise lines are finding this where they have had a reputation for quality, but in a desire to sell empty cabins, they lower the price very markedly and get an audience on a boat for 10 days that is at both ends of the spectrum, high income, low income, and the mixing together does not go very well. So it's a question of being careful what you bring in, that it does not harm what you have. Now, in the context of Punta del Este, I have been here now 20 hours, so I would not, deign to say what you might do. But it is clear there are obvious attractions here, there are obvious developments. You have casinos, you have a gambling image already on which perhaps can be built. You have the beaches, obviously, and a strong summer trade. You are in a fortunate position, I would suggest, of having two capital cities within an hour, certainly by air, with Montevideo and Buenos Aires, which provides you with both an international market and a large domestic market of somewhat high-income urban residents. But you do have a climatic variation, and there is no point in pretending the climate does not exist and it does not change. So successful extensions will have to be not dependent on the climate. So the kinds of things, I saw a sign coming in for a jazz festival. The obvious things to think about are festivals. Nice and Cannes in the south of France have their film festivals and a whole range of other cultural festivals. Venice has its film festival, its carnival, and so forth. So festivals, conferences, additional theatres and galleries. There's been a large move in many parts of the world. Guggenheim museums, extensive, picturesque, iconic theatres, galleries constructed to attract audiences, along with having the contents, the displays, the festivals, the performances to go with those. So in conclusion, I would suggest a lot depends on identifying constraints and overcoming constraints, being aware of competition, being aware of the image that you have, that you are able to preserve that image and market before one steps into drastic change. But much of seasonality is capable of being modified, and I think we should not be afraid to venture out to try to modify. Thank you.